Boots scraped against limestone, the sound sharp against the hush of the Balkan Ridge. Mist drifted upward from the Adriatic far below, veiling the jagged cliffs in ghostly white. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Calder moved steady along the narrow path, boot angled into crumbling shale, eyes fixed on the next marker. Behind her, 3 contractors fell quiet. Not the silence of focus, but the silence that comes before betrayal. The shove came fast. No warning, no words, just hands striking between her shoulder blades. Gravel gave way. The world tilted. Air tore past her face as her body dropped into nothingness. Instinct clawed louder than fear. Fingers scraped rock, splitting open until they caught a ledge no wider than her arm. Her shoulder slammed, ribs cracked, and then stillness. Above, laughter drifted down. She's gone. Nobody climbs back from that without a rope. Aaron's eyes opened through blood and dusk. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Before we begin, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Lieutenant Commander Aaron Calder did not fill a room when she entered it. She did not need to. At 41, she had the kind of presence that moved like a tide, quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore once you were caught in it. On paper, she was a decorated Navy SEAL officer now posted to a NATO liaison assignment. In person, she looked like just paperwork to people in a hurry. Lean instead of broad, soft-spoken instead of loud, she wore the uniform like a promise instead of a billboard. She had listened to the jokes the first day in country. Contractors, boots kicked up on Pelican cases, traded stories about who'd done what, downrange. When she was introduced, someone murmured, "Admin finally sent muscle," and the table laughed. Aaron didn't correct them. Correction wastes oxygen you may need later. Instead, she opened a green notebook, drew a thin line across the page, and began mapping the route across the Balkan Ridge elevations, wind shears, water points, and how long those 3 men could talk before they got thirsty. Her habits were quiet enough to be invisible unless you knew what to look for. Before a movement, she scanned ridgelines like she was reading a sentence in a language only she spoke. When she paused, 2 fingers wandered without thinking to the pale seam on her right shoulder, a scar that tugged faintly when cold got into it. Nobody asked about the scar. They asked about timelines and clearances and fuel. They asked if she could keep up. Aaron stepped around the question and into the work. She walked the distances the drivers claimed were close. She checked the rock faces that looked climbable on paper but bled shale in real life. She confirmed with her eyes what everyone else was happy to assume. She carried her own pack. It was smaller than the others. Inside were the only luxuries she allowed herself: a folded photo, a fountain pen with a tiny scratch on the cap, and a few envelopes pressed flat beneath a map case. The letters were for her daughter. 17 and impatient, Mia had her mother's eyes and none of her patience for silence. When the ridge went quiet, when camp stoves clicked off and the Balkans' night stretched like black glass, Aaron wrote, she didn't write about danger, not directly. She wrote about the way mist from the Adriatic hid the cliffs until the sun burned it away like a veil. She wrote about her first lemon in Crete and how bitter can teach the tongue to find sweet. She signed each letter with the same closing line, "All my love, be louder than your fear." Then she stacked the envelopes in the order she'd written them, counted once, and tucked them beneath the map again. During briefings, the contractors took up more space than the chairs gave them. They joked about spooks and pencil pushers. They called the corridor inspection a tourism day and asked who brought sunscreen. Aaron stood by the map board, using a grease pencil to mark altitudes and timing windows. She drew in tiny X's where cloud often backed up against the limestone. She circled one section of trail and said, softly, "No pass after 1400. Shale slough. The youngest contractor, all jawline and certainty, snorted, "We'll be fine." "We've done worse in Afghanistan," he said, as if geography and gravity agreed to veterans' discounts. His buddy added, "If pace is an issue, we can redistribute weight." Lighten the load for admin. No one laughed louder than a man who believed he'd never be humbled. The room obliged him. Even the air seemed to crowd around the noise. Erin recapped the pencil, met no one's eyes, and returned to her seat. She put her palm over the notebook for a moment, feeling the thin pressure of the pages she'd already filled. The old desire to interject rose and faded. She had learned the hard way that some truths live longer if you keep them out of the air. They did notice two things about her, though they made the wrong story out of both. They noticed her hands. Long-fingered, steady, the kind of hands that could thread a needle in a blackout or carve a notch into stone without chipping. They also noticed the ink that curled under her sleeve when she rolled it to check her watch. A suggestion of something maritime in its lines. A shape set close to the skin like a memory that didn't want to be looked at. The youngest asked, "You Navy or just Navy adjacent?" She smiled without showing teeth. "Just Navy," she said, and changed the subject back to weather. They mistook lean for fragile, quiet for easy to move. They mistook time for softness, because she didn't push to the front of conversations or claim weight she didn't need. They missed the way she measured rooms, the way she measured ridge lines, entry, exit, sight lines, what holds and what breaks. When they walked, she let them set the pace. Men who don't listen to topography sometimes need to lose a little breath before they hear you. She didn't rush the lesson. On the second day, one contractor let his pack slip into her hands while he retied a boot. It was heavier than it looked. Erin shouldered it without comment, shifting the weight so it sat over bone instead of muscle. That night she wrote Mia a shorter letter than usual. She described the sound of goats somewhere far down the slope and how the stars here looked stricter than the ones back home. She did not mention that men on payrolls will sometimes test the person they think won't push back. The liaison assignment fit her the way a disguise fits a spy, convincingly enough from 10 feet away. The badge got doors open faster than salutes. The briefings let her get a look at the why behind the where. But still, behind the careful wording and the shapes drawn on maps, there was the body that had done the other work. The body that knew the taste of salt through a rebreather, the slow burn of rope through wet gloves, the way steel hums against bone when you breach a door faster than the hinge can complain. Some memories keep their voices down. They don't need to shout to be believed. The contractors didn't ask about any of that. They asked for estimated time of arrival and how strict the curfew was in town. They asked if the cafe near the staging lot served American coffee. At chow, one of them said, too loud, "It's good they sent someone senior. Paper cuts can be fatal at altitude." The table smiled like the joke owed them rent. Erin excused herself early and checked the weather again. Her watch alarm was set 10 minutes ahead of the team's. She always woke to the quiet before other alarms began, a small private edge she'd given herself since Buttes. During those minutes, she breathed until her ribs opened the way they do when you're deep under and cannot afford a hurry. She counted steps when she walked narrow places. She counted how long jokes lasted. She counted how often the men checked their footing and how often they checked her. When she briefed them on the segment that would bring them across the limestone spine to the ridge above the sea, she kept the explanation spare. Wind shear on the exposed face. Sloughing shale. "Keep 3 points on the rock," she said. She traced a small path with the pencil, the line steady as a plumb bob. "Got it," the youngest said, already bored with advice whose cost he hadn't paid yet. "Copy," said the tallest, the tension sliding off her voice like water off oil. The third watched her hand for a second too long, considering her knuckles the way a gambler considers dice. No one asked why her hands did not shake. No one asked why she wore a small strip of athletic tape around her ring finger, the kind climbers use when skin starts to go before the rock does. No one asked what she was like before the scar or the silent habit of inventorying exits. That morning, as mist climbed the cliff edge, she checked the ridge again. Her gaze moved the way the wind did, feeling for invisible seams. She knelt once, placed her palm flat on rock, and gauged the tiny rattle of loose limestone under weight. Then she stood, tugged her sleeve down over the ink, and adjusted the strap on her pack. 2 fingers brushed the scar like a blessing, her breath left in a long, even line. She had learned long ago that underestimation is a kind of camouflage. It lets you see who people are when they think you are not looking. It teaches you which voices follow laughter and which follow the work. At a roadside chalkboard the night before, the three had laughed when she suggested an earlier step-off. Sunrise is for influencers, one said, and wrote a later time on the board with a flourish. She erased the flourish when they left and set her watch back 10 minutes again. Back at her cot, she pulled the pen from the small pocket sewn under the flap. The scratch on the cap was from a steel door that had not wanted to open. She liked it there. It reminded her that even tools keep records. "Hey, LT," a logistics sergeant said quietly as he passed. "You good if we shift the convoy 3 clicks east tomorrow?" "Road washout." Erin looked up and nodded. "Good catch," she said, meaning it. He studied her for a second, like he could hear a note others missed, then moved on. People sometimes called her quiet like it was a flaw. But quiet was where you listen for the small sounds that save you, cord stiffening before a snap, metal complaining under strain, breath going wrong in a partner's chest. Quiet was where you could feel the shape of a room, a path, a plan. She folded the letter to Mia and slipped it beneath the map case. For a moment, her hand hovered there, palm warm against the cool acetate. Then she closed the case, slid it into the pack, and stood. Underestimation had followed her into rooms with polished floors and onto gravel where goats chewed the morning into smaller pieces. It trailed her into briefings and up the first meters of rock. It hummed like a soft, wrong note at the edge of everything. But steel can hide under soft notes, and some of the strongest bridges in the world are quiet until you're standing on them, trusting them with your weight. No one in that camp saw the bridge when they looked at Erin. They saw lean where there was endurance. They saw age where there was mileage. They saw silence where there was discipline braided tight enough to bear a mountain. When she shouldered her pack on the morning of the climb, the contractors let out with swagger. She let them. The ridge didn't care who went first. Her fingers found the seam of tape on her ring finger and pressed once, a private guess. Then she took her place at the back, eyes tracing the spine of limestone that climbed into mist like a sentence waiting for its verb. The men's laughter drifted ahead in little bursts, bright as coins tossed into a fountain. By noon, clouds sifted along the cliff. By 1300, the air thinned and the rock shed small stones the way old trees shed bark. By the time the ridge narrowed to 2 boot widths, the men had run out of stories. Erin did not correct their pace. She did not remind them of the time window or the wind. She measured the line ahead, the drop beside, the stubborn facts underfoot. No one asked what she had done before NATO lanyards and liaison briefings. No one asked why her eyes kept checking, not the horizon, but the edges where safety turned into consequence. No one asked because they thought they already knew. They thought she was there to carry a clipboard across a mountain. They thought she was there to sign things and say, "Copy." They thought she wouldn't notice the way their voices went quiet on the narrowest stretch. At 41, underestimated for the 1000th time, Erin Calder pressed her palm to stone that didn't care about opinions. The scar tugged, the tape held, and the air tasted of salt and something like rain. She took one more step and let the mountain introduce everyone to the truth. The first disrespect came wrapped in a smile. They were still near the staging lot on day 2 when the tallest contractor's square shoulders, beard trimmed too carefully, reached to help Erin with her pack. He tugged a strap like a gentleman, made a show of sharing the load, then let his own ruck slip neatly into her hands while he fiddled with a bootlace that didn't need fixing. "Appreciate you, ma'am," he said brightly, already straightening, already empty-handed. Erin caught the extra weight before it dragged the straps against her collarbone. She shifted, rolling the center of gravity over the spine instead of the shoulders. The move was practiced, so small you'd miss it unless you'd carried more than your share. "Anytime," she said, voice even. The second disrespect arrived with a clatter. The youngest new boots, jawline like a helmet edge, let a pelican case slide off the tailgate to the gravel at her feet. "Could you grab that, Lieutenant Commander?" Hands full. He lifted his coffee as proof. The cup was empty. She bent her knees, not her back, and lifted the case by its recessed handles. The small move saved her ribs any argument. She placed it where it needed to go, then turned the hasps to face outward for faster access. He didn't notice the courtesy or the technique. He noticed that she didn't complain. By noon, the jokes had found their rhythm. "Careful, fellas," the third one said, wiry, a little older, eyes like he measured people for what they could give him. "Admin's gonna write us up if we sweat too loudly." He grinned as if he'd said something lethal. The others laughed, the easy kind of laughter that comes before the terrain sobers you. Aaron chewed, swallowed, and checked the ridge through the wave of mirth. Wind shoved thin clouds along the limestone spine, flagging where seams might shed. She folded her map and tucked it under her elbow. She did not correct the men, because the rock would do that later, and she respected expertise. The third disrespect was quieter. During the morning brief over a map smeared with coffee stains, the youngest leaned back in his chair and pitched his voice toward the others, not toward her. "So she's really a SEAL?" He stretched the last word like taffy. Or like admin SEAL? "You know how it is. Everybody's a commando on their resume." "Don't be rude," the tallest said, smirking. "She's here in a liaison capacity, which is Latin for clipboard." "You're thinking of French," the wiry one said. "As in liaison. As in politics." He let the word hang like smoke. Aaron uncapped a grease pencil and drew a rectangle around a section of ridge that liked to avalanche after noon. "We move this window up," she said. "We'll clear the slope before the slough." "Copy," the tallest said without looking. "We'll be fine." The fourth disrespect came in motion. On the first steep incline, the youngest decided the trail was a racetrack. He pushed pace, boots biting at the crumbling edges. When he found the narrow sections, he didn't slow, he just used more swagger, as if mass could twist physics into respect. "Come on, Grandma!" He tossed over his shoulder with a laugh that was more about the others than about her. "You want me to get you one of those hiking sticks with the little rubber feet?" The others laughed again, out of habit now. The air in front of them was still wide enough to accommodate ego. Aaron kept 3 points on the rock, both feet and one hand, then both hands and one foot. She breathed slow, a metronome set beneath the wind. She could have passed them and been at the top waiting when they arrived, ragged, but she stayed in the pocket behind them where the ridgeline let her see their choices before they made them. If you had been there, what would you have done? Would you have snapped back? Would you have taken the bait and let your heart rate talk more than your feet? Or would you have done as she did? Half a smile, a little nod, and a tighter lock on what mattered. The fifth disrespect had the shape of helpfulness. On a traverse where the cliffs slanted down and away like a bad promise, the wiry one reached back and offered Aaron a hand she did not need. His palm hovered in her peripheral vision, fingers splayed, the way you hold a treat out to test whether the dog trusts you. "All good?" he asked loudly, to be heard by the others. "We can take your pack if you're struggling." "I'm not," Aaron said, and placed her boot exactly where the rock would hold it best. He let his hand fall, mouth tilting with the thin pleasure of having offered something that could be refused in public. The sixth disrespect hid inside a compliment. "You move well for your age," the tallest said at the next rest stop, breath just a little too fast for the altitude he claimed didn't bother him. "Seriously." "Respect. Appreciate it," she said, and ate quietly. He leaned toward the others, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Old school, tough as leather. But this ridge eats knees." The seventh arrived on paper. In the evening, as the light went the color of steel and the cold crept down from the sky, the youngest scratched an adjustment onto the chalkboard where they kept their plan. He pushed their departure 30 minutes later than Aaron had advised. "Sun'll be higher," he said. "Warmer. Better visibility." "Warmer," the wiry one echoed. "Plus, logistics says the truck won't be ready." Aaron looked at the board, then at the sky, the kind of sky that had its own plans. "Earlier is safer," she said simply. "Sloughing starts after midday. You'll have to work twice to get half as far." "Noted," the tallest said, erasing her note with the side of his hand. "We'll risk it." They smiled the way gamblers smile when the table feels lucky. The eighth disrespect brought money into the room. At dinner, while heaters ticked and spoons clicked against bowls, The wiry one asked an open question to no one at all. Isn't it wild how some billets open if you know the right senator? He glanced at Aaron's badge. NATO liaison. Sounds connected. The youngest grinned like he'd found a thread to pull. Right? Must be nice. Skip the line, skip the miles, skip the boring parts. Aaron stirred her stew and said nothing. There are lines you can cross to answer, and there are lines you preserve on purpose. She had spent enough years in rooms that measured what you said for how it could be used against you later. Silence was not surrender. It was a weapon that didn't show. The ninth disrespect stepped over simple annoyance into something heavier. As they sorted gear for the next day, the youngest lifted her small coil of static line and waggled it like a joke snake. What's this, ma'am? Souvenir from REI? He tossed it and caught it by a loop, one-handed. I thought you Navy people liked your ropes thicker. Put that down, she said. Not loud, not soft, just clean. He held her gaze a beat too long, felt something there he'd missed, and placed the coil back with exaggerated care. The 10th disrespect chose proximity. On the trail the following morning, as the ridge narrowed and the cliffs below took on the depth that makes your stomach name your choices, the tallest drifted back until his shoulder almost brushed hers. You sure you're good? He said. We can slow down. Got a soft spot for moms? She felt the word like a thumb pressed into a bruise. He didn't know about the letters. He didn't know about Mia. He didn't know, and still the word landed as if he meant to find the place it would hurt and press there. I'm good, she said. The 11th disrespect put itself in the wind. On an exposed face, gusts hit in pulses, each one an instruction to go slow or be surprised. Aaron set a rhythm that matched the gusts, moving when the air allowed, anchoring when it leaned. The youngest laughed and kept going through a gust, arms out like theater. Look at me, guys, no hands. Gravity's a suggestion. His boot slipped a fraction, then bit again. He laughed harder, because that is what you do when shame brushes your cheek and you don't want anyone to see you blush. 3 points, Aaron said across the wind, to all of them, to none of them. The 12th disrespect was simple. They didn't listen. They moved when the air said, wait. They spoke when the rock said, quiet. They assumed the world would bend to their confidence. If you had been there, what would you have done? Would you have stepped ahead and seized the lead? Would you have lectured men who mistake volume for safety? Or would you have banked your breath like money and saved it for the moment the mountain demanded payment? By midday, the ridge pulled itself up like a spine, the limestone ribs pushing out into a narrow place where the trail thinned to 2 boot widths with a clean fall on either side. The Adriatic lay spread like steel below, the mist running off it in translucent sheets that made the world look like a thing you could fold. The 13th disrespect chose formality as its cover. At a cramped rest notch, the wiry one asked for her opinion on the next traverse, then began speaking over her answer with his own plan before she finished the second sentence. Right, he said, cutting across her, so we'll do what we said. He stood, ended the conversation by moving his body back onto the trail, and the others followed his physical punctuation. It was a small move, but it carried the weight of a gavel. The 14th brought sarcasm to a science. The youngest, breathing heavier now, looked back over his shoulder as Aaron tested a seam with 2 fingers. Want me to paint some stair rails for you, ma'am? Maybe a little elevator to the top? She smiled. Half, small, unreadable. You have the marker, she said. You draw the elevator. I'll climb. The tallest barked a laugh and almost hid the cough that came after it. The 15th disrespect wrapped itself in theater. As they approached the narrowest run, the wiry one called out, Picture time. He spread his arms and made a show of the view, backing near the edge like the ridge was a stage and the drop a crowd of adoring fans. Get the officer in the shot, he added over his shoulder, for the report. He did not turn enough to see her face. He did not see that she didn't move to join the frame. He didn't see because the joke was its own audience. They continued. The trail demanded it. The mountain has no patience for the human love of performance. The laughter grew less frequent, punctuated by small silences where fear chewed at their edges and they chewed back. The 16th disrespect sharpened. The youngest, less careful now and more tired, let his pack slip again. This time, not in camp, but on the spine. The weight swung out for a second, yanking him toward the drop. He grabbed for the strap and found it, then looked back, thinly embarrassed. Almost lost that, he said, turning humiliation into bravado. Would have been your job to fetch it, right? He winked like an insult could be softened by flirting. Secure your load, Aaron said. You won't get a second invitation. He raised his eyebrows. The words had edges he could feel through his shirt. He turned away without a reply. The 17th disrespect traded in rumor. As they worked along a run where the limestone broke into plates you had to step like words in a sentence, the tallest leaned toward the wiry one and kept his voice low enough to be private and loud enough to be heard. Buddy at headquarters says half these liaison posts are favors. Case of wine, 3 dinners, suddenly you've got a badge. The wiry one answered with a snort. Explains a lot. Neither looked back at Aaron. Neither needed to. The point of the comment had never been her hearing, only her place in their story. She let the words go past. They had the texture of cheap cloth. They would not last a wash. The 18th disrespect dressed itself as concern again. The youngest paused at a switchback, turned, and called down, "Want me to talk you through the next bit?" "I did a ropes course at a bachelor party once. Sick zip line." The tallest laughed until the cliff asked him to stop. Aaron's half-smile showed again. "Thanks." "Watch the step at your 1 o'clock, plate's loose." He stepped where she said not to, and the plate shifted, his boot sliding an inch before it caught. He recovered with a loud joke, cheeks flaring under sunburn where the flush hid. They pushed on. The sky carried a color that warned, wind felt more like instruction than weather. The 19th disrespect went barefaced. At a tiny shelf where they paused to drink, the wiry one finally asked, "So what's your deal, Lieutenant Commander?" "You write reports? Walk clipboards up and down hills? Or did you do the real thing before this?" He swept a hand at the ridge like the mountain was her assignment turned in late. Aaron drank and capped the bottle. "Everyone's assignment is the real thing to someone," she said. "Yours today is to cross this safely." He smirked. "Copy, schoolteacher!" The 20th arrived on a whisper that was meant to hurt. The youngest, thinking the wind would eat his words, leaned close to the tallest as they started the most exposed segment. "She's here because of politics," he murmured. "Someone owed someone." "Watch." Watch what? Aaron thought. Watch you? Watch gravity? Watch how the mountain treats certainty like a dare. They moved single file along the spine. The sea wrote light under the mist. A gull cried somewhere, sound sheared thin by distance. At the narrowest .2 boot widths, clean fall. The ridge required a specific humility. You had to place your feet as if each step had a price and you could afford it only once. You had to accept that swagger is heavy and heavy falls faster. The air thinned. Breath got louder. The clink of carabiners and the scratch of soles on rock made a small music. The 21st disrespect stole space. The tallest shortened the gap between himself and Aaron until his shoulder pressed lightly against her pack each time the trail kinked. It was a herding move, casual enough to deny, firm enough to direct. When she adjusted to widen the distance, he closed it again. "Stay close," he said. "Ridge is narrow. Give space," she answered. "Ridge is narrow." He chuckled and did not move. "If you had been there, what would you have done? Turned and addressed it? Stopped the line on a place where stopping was expensive? Or kept moving, saving the correction for the end of the narrow where the mountain let you spend your voice without interest?" The 22nd disrespect took the form of a private joke. The youngest pretended to stumble, windmilled his arms theatrically, then steadied, looking back to see if she'd flinched. She didn't. He frowned, denied his performance, the small trophy of reaction, and turned forward again, deprived and annoyed. The 23rd arrived on the soles of their boots. They began to kick small stones back as they went, careless, impatient. A few pebbles pinged off Aaron's shin like punctuation. The wiry one didn't look back when a larger chunk skittered and bounced off her thigh. "Watch your feet," she said. "Copy," he answered, no change in his gait. By now the insults had done their work. Not to her. She had learned how to turn words aside like rain, but to the men who spoke them. Each joke, each small contempt, had stitched the three together into a little unit, a tight braid of mutual reinforcement that mistook itself for strength. They heard each other better than they heard the rock. They believed the story they had told about her, and belief is a poor map when the trail tightens. The 24th disrespect chose silence. They stopped talking to her at all. They spoke around her, past her, through her. They used her presence as a prop in their banter, not as a member of their team. The absence had weight. They reached a shoulder of rock wide enough to rest. The mist here moved like breath over skin. The sea made a low iron sound far below. Erin checked the time window she'd warned about and saw it sliding closed like a door. 5 minutes, she said. Then we pushed the next run before the slough. The youngest rolled his eyes at the older two. Teacher says 5. The wiry one yawned. Make it 10. 5, Erin repeated. You'll want all of it. The tallest stretched his arms and smiled. We'll be fine. They were not fine. They moved into the exposed run just as wind began to hump along the ridge in irregular pulses. The plates of limestone that had slept all morning woke and shifted underfoot. The trail went from a path to a suggestion. 3 points, Erin said again, calm and even. Anchor. Then move. The youngest snorted, then obeyed without naming it obedience. The others made small adjustments they didn't admit were in response to her voice. The line held, and then the ridge narrowed to its pinched throat, 2 boot widths, perhaps a hair less, the drop clean and mean. This was the place where confidence pays or doesn't. This was the place where deference is not submission but skill. They moved, 1, then 2, then 3. Erin came last by choice, a shepherd position she'd adopted out of habit, not trust. The 25th disrespect arrived like a bad idea fully grown. The tallest glanced back over his shoulder at the wrong moment, deciding to make eye contact while his foot looked for purchase. His boot missed the place the mountain would have accepted, slid on powdery grit, then found it again with a lurch. Eyes forward, Erin said, not unkind. He stiffened. Pride disliked instruction. He took the next step faster than the rock wanted, and then reined himself in with a little flourish, pretending control had never wobbled. The 26th came from the youngest's mouth, shaped like boredom. I swear, this is taking forever, he said, spreading his arms again as if to stretch the day thinner. My grandmother could. He didn't finish. The wind took the rest. The 27th was the last one, and it was not words. They reached the narrowest section of all, no room for 2 people to pass without one turning their shoulders sideways into air. The rock here was flaked, the edges sharp enough to cut fabric. Mist dragged a damp hand across their faces. Erin placed her right boot, felt the plate's edge, shifted weight slowly, and found the place where it would hold. Her left hand found a notch no wider than a wedding band. Her right hand slid until fingertips bit an edge under a lip of stone. The men in front of her moved out onto the little ramp with too much confidence and too little attention. The youngest laughed again, high with nerves he wouldn't name. The wiry one's jaw went tight. The tallest exhaled a noise that was not quite a whistle. They reached the tighter corner. The line kinked. They slowed to make the turn. For a breath, the world was quiet except for wind. Then the 27th disrespect reached her back. It was not an accident. It was pressure placed just below the shoulder blades, hands that knew where to push to move a body without the body owning the decision. It was practiced. It was timed. It was betrayal. There was no word before it. No oops, no watch your step. Just the shove, clean and deliberate, delivered in a pocket of wind between gusts, so that only the sound of boots on limestone marked it. Gravel popped under Erin's soles. The world tilted. Mist opened like a curtain and the sea showed its iron face far below. Air tore past her ears. Her stomach rose to her throat. Her body left the ridge. Instinct roared. Training did not ask for permission. Her left hand slid and caught a ledge no wider than her forearm. The skin split at the base of her fingers. Her shoulder slammed into stone. Pain lit hot and white, then narrowed. Her right knee hit hard, snagged on a bite of rock, held. Her hip barked. The ledge shuddered under the sudden weight, and then accepted it. Above, there was a sound like boots scuffing, and then silence, the kind of silence that is not absence, but choice. Then laughter came, thin with relief. "She's gone," one said. Nobody climbs back from that without a rope. The wind carried their voices down to where she hung, breath sawed short by ribs that had opinions now. The limestone was cold under her cheek. Blood slid along her temple and hung for a second before the air took it. Erin blinked once. Twice, she tasted dust and iron. The cliff face in front of her was pocked with the small, mean textures of sedimentary rock that eats at skin and pride. The drop below was clean and terminal. What would you have done if you were there? Would you have shouted? Would you have cursed the men on the ridge until the wind ran out of syllables? Or would you have done what she did? Count breath, count options, count holds. She exhaled until her lungs emptied and the panic had fewer places to sit. She inhaled until the edges of her vision came back into focus. Her right hand, 3 fingers good, the ring finger taped, found a seam and pressed. Her left hand adjusted its grip by the width of a grain of salt. Her right foot searched and found a lip that pretended to be enough. Above, boots shifted. Voices murmured, quick, ugly, satisfied. "Cleaner than I thought. Let's move. Last thing we need is questions." The laughter faded. The ridge kept its own counsel. Erin stayed where she was for one more breath, then another, letting the body catalog damage. Ribs, likely cracked, not broken through. Shoulder angry but seated. Hip bruised, functional. Skin open in places that would complain later. Her eyes tracked the face of the limestone, looking for what it would give a patient climber. The cliff was not kind, but it was honest. It told the truth to people who knew how to listen. Scars from rain. Small overhangs that kept grip drier. Little vertical cracks whose edges were sharp enough to bite, but deep enough to mean it. A coil of static line hers bumped her hip with its own small weight. The knife on her calf had stayed. The pistol was gone. She felt the absence like a tooth suddenly missing from a familiar bite. She blinked again and set her jaw. Cold threaded the wind now. Dusk was building itself from the edges in. She could not wait for rescue. That was not coming. She would not call to men who had already answered her once with their hands. She locked her ring finger, tape digging into raw skin, and began to climb. The rising conflict ended not with voices, but with the choice she made in their absence. The mountain had taught her long ago that you cannot argue with gravity. You can only negotiate. And negotiation requires leverage of stone, of will, of the quiet in you that does not run. Above, the ridge was already forgetting what it had done. Below, the sea did not care who had pushed whom. Between them, Erin Calder moved by inches, each one purchased without a word. Stone pressed cold against Erin's cheek, a rough, grainy chill that forced her breath to shorten and measure itself. The ledge didn't feel like safety so much as a pause, thin, slanted, grudging. She shifted a fraction, and pain bloomed bright under her ribs, a flare that stole sound from the world and left only the sea's iron hush. She counted heartbeats until the hurt narrowed from wildfire to a controlled burn. Ribs, not shattered, but cracked, 2 at least. Right side, a hot line under muscle. Hip, bruised deep, stiffening already. The joint would complain with every reach, but it would hold. She tested her right shoulder and saw stars at the edges of her vision. The shoulder socket held, the tendons shrieked, then gritted their teeth and stayed. Skin wept along her forearm where limestone had planed it thin. Inventory now. Left hand, blood sticky, fingers intact, grip strong enough to keep. Right hand, 3 good fingers, ring finger taped, tape wet, rough, still doing its small warm miracle. Her pistol was gone. She felt the absence like a missing tooth. Weight that should have been at her hip wasn't, and the cold pressed harder in its place. But the knife at her calf remained, the kydex sheath scuffed, the handle a familiar reassurance against bone. Above, the ridge breathed boots and then went quiet, the kind of quiet that chooses itself. She didn't look up. Looking up wouldn't change what waited there. She let her head rest against rock, cheek to limestone, and closed her eyes for the length of 2 breaths. Not surrender calibration. When she opened them, the world came back crisp, micro cracks, salt-wet glitter, mica dust like ground glass. She rolled her left sleeve back to keep blood from matting the fabric. The rip in the cuff exposed ink tightened with cold lines of a frogman trident, fine and spare, inked close to the muscle as if the emblem wanted to keep her pulse company. Beneath it, a date in numerals so small you could miss them if you didn't know to look. She covered the ink with the torn sleeve again. Not for shame, not for secrecy. Just have it. Some truths keep warmer under cloth. She probed the angry seam of tissue that crossed her right shoulder, a pale strap of memory from Afghanistan door blown late, blast over pressure, a hallway that corkscrewed in heat and grit. Her fingers paused there, a private acknowledgement. The scar didn't ache so much as hum, as if it were an old tuning fork struck again by danger. "Stay with it, ironclad," she whispered, voice soft as breath. The call sign came out on reflex, a name few used and fewer knew. It steadied her, the way a line thrown into dark water steadies your hand, even before it finds the boat. She shifted her weight the smallest measurable amount. The ledge complained with a chalky creak, then settled. She placed the flats of her fingers along the stone and felt it the way a medic feels, a wrist for pulse, reading warmth, tremor, truth. No panic. Panic wastes oxygen, widens pupils, shrinks options. Planning is a ladder. She began to build it, rung by rung. First rung, body position. Left hand locked in a shallow divot, a half-moon pocket with enough bite for the first 2 knuckles. Right hand smeared on a pinch under a slick lip, ring finger tape, the only friction where skin would have slipped. Second rung, feet. Right foot toed into a thin dimple, a dish eroded by rain and chance, no wider than a coin. Left foot scummed against a smear of grit, toe angled to create micro-friction. Not pretty, but enough to start. Third rung, route. She scanned the face up and left, then up and right, mapping seams that ran vertical like old handwriting in stone. Where water cuts, fingers follow. Where shadows stay dry, tape holds. Where lichens grow fat, avoid. Gusts shouldered the cliff. She pressed closer, ribs mutinying, then accepted. Wind is tempo. You move to it or you get moved by it. Above, a pebble clicked and pattered into silence. Then, nothing. The men were gone or listening or arguing with their own hearts. Irrelevant, for now. She slid her right hand off the slick lip and back to the knife. The sheath gave up the blade with a small, intimate pop. Steel in her palm felt like a sentence ending in a period final, plain, necessary. No theatrics. She didn't stab for show or hack at rock like a movie. She used the knife as a wedge, press-fitting it into a vertical seam just enough to give her 2 more millimeters of grip. Millimeters matter. At altitude, with ribs counting your choices, 2 millimeters can be a friend's hand where none should be. She breathed on the blade, warming it, watched fog purl and vanish, then set it again, firmer. "Anchor," she murmured. "Then move." Her voice kept the mind from splintering around the pane's edges. Words made scaffolding. She climbed them too. She tested the next holds with the quiet patience of someone who has made friends with slowness. Knuckle, press, pull, stop. Toe, smear, wait, stop. The limestone's language is abrasion and angle. She listened for sentences in it, where the crystals gave grit, where the bedding planes offered honesty, where the edges would chip under load. Under her fingertips, the rock spoke, harsh, factual, unromantic. She respected the tone. A band of damp cut diagonally across her planned path, a dark stripe where mist had collected and refused to move on. Wet equals slimed equals slide. She sketched another line in her head, one that flirted with an overhang to keep the grips in the dry. Her shoulder throbbed. She let the throb come and go like a tide, fitting her movements between the peaks. Pain is a metronome if you let it be. She glanced down once, not for drama, but to calibrate fear. The drop was clean, treetops far below frozen like green foam. Scale simplified decision. There was no survive, a fall path. There was only up. A gust hit, shouldering her against the face. She waited it out, cheek to rock, lips tasting dust and salt. When the air eased, she moved again, one economy-sized motion after another. Her sleeve snagged and drew back another inch, ink catching the eye again. Trident's tip in thin black, the date below it like a heartbeat written in code. Afghanistan pulled across her shoulder as if the scar remembered the weight of a teammate dragged backwards out of a doorway whose handle had just tried to kill them. She let the memory pass through, not overtake. Ironclad, up and right, she breathed. The call sign steadied her hands more than the rock did. It was not magic. It was muscle memory given a name. She jammed the knife higher into the seam and levered delicately, not to carve, but to make space, barely the width of a fingernail. Her left hand crept, spider-delicate, into the new bite. She pulled, felt the reluctant give of body versus gravity, and gained an inch. Another breath. Another inch. Each one purchased with grip, balance, patience. She indexed her feet to match. Right toe found a nub, no bigger than an aspirin. Left foot floated, searched, then settled on a sandpaper patch whose friction she trusted more than sight. An old Buddhist instructor's voice wandered in from a decade ago, dry as chalk. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Fast is dead. She smiled, small, private, and moved slower. Something ticked in her ribs. She paused and let the ache name itself. Crack, not break. Good. Breaking is chaos. Cracking is complaint. The wind hauled at the mist, tore it into streamers that slid past her peripheral vision. Cold worked its way into her fingers, a mean, needling cold that made sensation wobble toward numbness. She flexed each finger in turn, then set them again, commanding them back to this task and not to the shiver waiting behind it. 2 meters above, a small horizontal seam offered the promise of a proper rest for forearms. She measured distance, a ladder of 3 good moves and 1 ugly one. Ugly can be honest if you price it right. Knife up. Left hand up. Right foot to nub. Pause. Left foot smears. Hold, pole. Set. Breath whistled through her teeth, not from panic, from pressure. She kept the whistle low. Sound can steal focus. The sea went on breathing for everything else. Anchor, she said again, almost without sound. Words built a room inside the danger. Inside that room she could think. Her right hand slid and found the horizontal seam. Relief tempted haste. She refused it. She lay her forearm along the narrow shelf, bled weight into bone, and let her fingers uncurl a fraction. Blood had tracked from a split at the knuckle, ribboning down to drip into the seam like a red punctuation mark. It steamed faintly once, then cooled, lost even that drama. She licked dust off her lip and tasted iron and wind. Above, something, a pack strap or a conscience creaked. No voices followed. The ridge remained a blank in the air. Plan the next sequence. The seam to the right died after a meter. The left ran thinner but higher. High is useful, thin is not. She angled for a compromise, upright left, trading altitude for control, then returning. She glanced at the strip of athletic tape hugging her ring finger. It had taken on gray from the limestone. Grit had worked into the weave until it felt like leather. She pressed the pad of that finger to the stone with bureaucratic insistence. Paperwork. This is not, she thought, and the humor steadied her more than it should have. 2 moves, she told herself. 2 more. She made them with the commitment of someone buying a one-way ticket. No half choices now. Half gets you back where you started, only tired. Her shadow, thin and angled, tilted with her against the cliff. The mist broke and sunlight, pale as a blade, glanced off the knife and stung her eye. She blinked, shifted, and kept going. She found a pocket, a rare, round kindness in the otherwise stingy face. Fingers sank to the first crease and sang with gratitude they didn't voice. She matched feet, then prepared to flag left for the ugly move she'd priced earlier. Hip angry, ribs angrier, she went anyway. Left foot swung wide, toe skimming useless rock until there, an edge thin as a credit card. She set the edge and pressed downward like she meant it, and the stone decided, for now, to agree. Another breath, another inch. Heartbeat counted, contained, time thinned. It did what time does when danger pins it, stretched and snapped and stretched again. She refused to look up for permission. Up doesn't grant it. Up only waits. Knife. Seam. Stop. Her sleeve rode a little higher, the trident flashing once like a wink from a past that didn't need explaining. The date under it ached the way anniversaries do, quietly, insistently. Afghanistan's dust, another cliff, another door, voices, names. She let them stand in the hall and didn't invite them farther in. Ironclad, she said again, throat almost too tight for sound. Stay with me. Names are ladders too. She climbed her own. She reached the underside of a small overhang, no real roof, more of a lip that asked for creative honesty. Straight up would waste strength she didn't have. Out and up would tax the ribs past reason. She looked left. A fin of stone, shallow, arced up like a blade. Ugly, but true. It would go. She backstepped, dropped her right knee a whisper to create counterpressure, and palmed the knife into a thinner seam to her left. The steel bit with a gritty complaint, then held like a handshake you could trust. She took the weight and moved, patient as a sermon, precise as a ledger. The ledge that had saved her cruel, stingy, was a meter below now. Above, the ridge's belly made a shadow that cut across the face, a promise of shelter and also of men. She accepted both without letting either command her pace. Wind rose, then fell. She moved in the lull. Anchor. Move. Anchor. Move. Her breath came even, if shorter. Fear had a stool in the corner of the room she'd built. It watched, quiet, not invited to speak. She had other guests. Discipline, memory, the old instructor's voice. 2 more moves and the fin would give her a place to set both forearms and sigh once like a person. She made the first, the nice handle warm in her palm now from work. She made the second, shoulder tugging the scar like a warning bell, and then she settled, elbows against stone, forehead lowered for a single blessed, counted second. Inventory again, because planning is never finished. Ribs holding, hip protesting, but in the union. Hands taxed, tape still doing its job, knife true. Root above, shallow dihedral, then a rougher patch, the kind of exfoliating slabs that steal skin if you lose patience. She breathed, slow and easy as a tide. The mountain breathed back, slow and indifferent. Indifference is fine. Indifference you can negotiate with. She raised her head and looked up, not for permission, not for hope, just for the next 3 holds. She found them and nodded once, to herself, to the rock, to the call sign that had followed her up the cliff like a shadow with a spine. No panic. No hurry, only the work. And then she moved again, inch by inch, a quiet decision traveling through bone and tape and steel toward the ridge that had chosen silence over truth. Stone pressed to her cheek like a cold hand that refused to comfort. The ledge was a grudging parenthesis in a sentence that wanted to end. She did not scream. Screaming wastes air and gives nothing back. Erin counted breath the way she used to count strokes underwater. In through the teeth, out slow, keep the edges of vision from going white. Her pistol was gone, the missing weight nagged at her hip. The knife at her calf answered with a familiar, patient presence. She eased it free. The sheath gave a small, honest pop, as if agreeing to the plan. Blood striked her knuckles, drying to rust at the seams of her fingers. Chalk dust lifted off the drier patches of limestone and turned the red to gray. She tested the ledge with the flat of her palm. Grit whispered under skin. The stone accepted her weight the way old friends do, reluctant but true. Anchor, she breathed. Then move. No one heard but the wind and the rock. That was enough. She set the knife spine into a hairline vertical seam, not hammering pressing, coaxing the edge to bite without splitting the host. Steel flexed 1 thin millimeter, then settled, a contract written in friction. Left hand in a shallow pocket, first 2 knuckles deep. Right foot smearing for purchase on a coin-sized nub. She rose 1 palm's height. Held. Let pain speak and then quiet. Ribs lit hot and sharp, then narrowed to a stubborn line. Hip protested, but stayed in the union. She moved again. Small. Economical. Like writing clean cursive on rough paper. Above, the ridge held its breath. Somewhere, boots shifted and stopped pretending they didn't. Aaron ignored the men the way you ignore a shore once you commit to swim. Thought was oxygen. She spent it only on grip. Knife up a finger width, then 2. Wrist rolled, edge wedged, weight bled into steel. Slow is smooth, she whispered, barely sound. Smooth is fast. Bud S lived in her bones as rhythm, not bravado. Cadence kept panic from stealing decisions. Air came in pulses. The cliff taught her to move in the pauses, not the gusts. 1 meter. Then half. The limestone changed texture under her fingertips, less pitted, more sly. She avoided the friendly lie and went for the mean seam that would hold. Her sleeve rode up, ink flashing once in the shadow, frogman trident, thin lines close to muscle, a date like a heartbeat written small. She covered it with the back of her wrist and climbed. Some truths stay warmer under cloth. A gull shivered the air with a thin cry. The sea exhaled under the mist, iron and endless. Her right hand slipped half a fingernail's width and stopped. The knife sang a small, bright note and steadied everything. She didn't apologize, she adjusted. Left foot found a sandpaper patch. Right toes pressed the knife spine as if stepping on a rung made of will. Full hands, she murmured. Full mind. Blood and chalk made a paste along her fingertips. She felt the grit as information, not inconvenience. Another sequence, palm, pull, set. Toe, smear, breathe. When wind shouldered her, she flattened and let it pass. When it tired, she turned its retreat into distance. She knew halfway, not by height, but by temperament. Here the stone wanted speed you could not afford to give, she answered with patience. Patience has teeth. Above, a rounded rock let go of its bed and came whispering. Air changed around it. She sensed the different draft the way divers feel, a rip current. She tucked chin to shoulder and met the cliff with more of herself. The stone kissed the meat of her shoulder and went skittering, malicious and light. Stars pricked at the edges of sight. Her grip shrank half an inch toward failure. She pushed the knife deeper. Steel bit, complained, held. Stay, she told her hand. Stay, she told the spark of fear that wanted the microphone. The rock rattled away down the long face and was nothing. Above, a scuff and the embarrassed sound of someone pretending accidents don't count. Her scar hummed. A corridor, a blast, a man dragged backward by his plate carrier. Memory stood in the doorway and did not step in. Anchor, she said again, and the metronome of breath obeyed. Move. Stop. Move. She priced a thin traverse right to avoid a wet stripe. Wet limestone lies, dry limestone bargains. Knife up. Left fingertips into a sharp-edged bite. Right foot to a polite nothing that worked only if she meant it. She meant it. Mist braided around her forearms. Cold tried to turn her fingers into strangers. She flexed each digit once, quick and specific, then set them again. Ownership reclaimed. Another meter. Another pause. She laid a forearm along a rare horizontal seam and let her fingers uncurl a hair. Blood beaded, cooled, forgot to be dramatic. Above, something metallic answered itself. A faint clink, bright as a pin tapping glass. On the ridge, a voice thinned by distance. What was that? Rocks, came the reply. Dismissal is cheap at altitude. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth and left. Not gloating confirmation. She tongued dust off her lip and tasted salt and iron. Hunger tugged once, ignored. 2 more moves to a fin of stone that would let her set both elbows. She did the first with care and the second with a promise not to rush the third. The third was ugly and honest, left foot flagging wide until it found a credit card edge. She pressed downward like permission was earned, not given. The cliff accepted her license. Up and right, she breathed. Ironclad, stay with me. Names are ladders too. She climbed her own. The ridge's underbelly shadowed her now, turning the world into a tunnel. Relief waited at the end like a sprinter who false starts. She kept it on a leash. Relief can be as dangerous as fear. Knife one last time into a seam she'd measured with more faith than sight. The blade wedged with a gritty, polite bite, as if to say, all right, once more, right hand over the lip. 3 fingers, 4, heel of palm. She flattened, rolled an elbow, slid a knee to stone. Weight moved from vertical to horizontal like a prayer turning into posture. Up. Not standing present. She stayed low. Silhouette is for people who want applause. The ridge was blue-gray, evening already practicing its lines. The sea had darkened to slate. The air tasted of iron and propane ghosts. 20 paces ahead, the 3 men argued with their bodies. The youngest jabbed the air. The tallest blocked with crossed arms. The wiry one held still, ready to flee conversation and consequences. Aaron tucked into the shadow pool of a tumbled block. The mountain keeps seats in its darkness for those who know where to sit. She gave her body 30 seconds to shake and be done. Physiology demands its tithe. She paid it quietly. Her sleeve had crept high again. The trident's lines lay cold against skin. The tiny date pulsed the past. She covered both, as much for warmth as for habit. Some stories are not for this audience. She rolled her wrists. Blood returned with pins and needles and relief. The knife's edge was kissed by limestone, but still honest. She breathed with intention until her heartbeat sounded less like alarm and more like intention. Everything narrowed to sight lines and timing. Smell came next. Sweat, leather, synthetic fabric, a too-sweet energy drink. Smell is a ruler. It told her the men were close enough to reach with truth or with silence. Not yet. Patience has a job here. The youngest's voice carried, ragged with bravado. I said it was clean. Clean, the tallest echoed, a beat late, as if conscience had to shove the word out. The wiry one watched the path back the way prey studies cover. Cowardice masquerades as caution when the bill arrives. Aaron marked the bulge in the youngest's pack-coiled line stuffed badly. Carelessness leaves handles. She laid her fingers into a split in the ridge and listened to the stone's small warmth. It felt absurdly like Mia's palm in winter, heat in a glove making cold bearable. The ridge added its tiny sounds, a zipper, a pebble settling, fabric rasping stone. Silence got busy, the way it does before weather breaks. She thought of the ledge that had held her and refused to look back. You do not thank a knife until you put it away. You do not thank a ledge until you leave it. Breath in, breath out. Hunt for the exact moment the story must turn. A breeze slid across the ridge and lifted a few grains near her boot. They ticked, then slept again. The men did not turn. Would you have noticed her if you were standing there? Would you have felt the ridge grow a second heartbeat? Or would you, like they did, have let the faint clink of steel on limestone file itself under rocks fall and grin at the joke you needed to believe? Aaron's eyes adjusted to the seam between shadows. The world sorted itself into lines, her line, their line, the clean line where the mountain's patience ended. She rose a palm's height within the darkness and slid to a position that watched without being watched. Knife in hand, breath quiet, gaze steady. Not a ghost. Not a miracle. Only a woman who climbed in silence with blood on her knuckles and chalk in the creases, who dug steel into stone and made the mountain return her, inch by inch. By the time the youngest finally glanced over his shoulder, his brain edited what it saw. Shadows. The rock. Nothing. He turned back to his argument, eager to outrun whatever else might be catching up. The ridge kept its counsel. Erin waited inside the hush a few breaths longer, not because she had to, because she chose to. She measured the distance between what they believed and where she was. Then she let the decision settle in her bones the way the knife had settled in the seam. The climb had been the message. The silence would be the delivery. Would you have noticed her if you were standing there? Or would you have laughed like they did until the shadow shifted and the mountain decided it was done with false stories? Engines climbed the mountain like a slow promise. Low gears, steady throttle. The kind of approach that belonged to people who understood switchbacks and consequence. The three contractors turned toward the sound with relief ready on their faces, as if rescue could be worn like a jacket you hadn't earned. Finally, the youngest muttered, shaking out his arms, "We'll brief and bounce." "Beer's on the way down," the tallest added, trying on normal like it still fit. The wiry one said nothing. He watched the trail, eyes narrowed, accounting for details he had ignored all day. Erin stayed in shadow, belly to stone, breath level. The knife lay along her thigh, a quiet line of steel that had forgotten to be dramatic. She let the sound of brakes and doors and bootfalls move through the air before she moved through it. 5 soldiers stepped onto the ridge, a medic close behind. Then an officer whose posture carried rank without needing to introduce it. Colonel James Roth did not search the scene, he absorbed it. Sky dimming to blue iron, mist slanting off the Adriatic. 3 men standing like punctuation marks out of order. And in a seam of darkness, a body shaped like Patience. He stopped, boots square, voice even, sound off. The youngest jumped first. "Sir, hold," Roth said, not sharp, just final. 2 fingers moved. The medic peeled left, scanning edges and faces, already counting ribs, pupils, blood. Roth's gaze slid past the contractors and found the shadow that was not rock. The ridge fell quieter, as if the wind were waiting to hear what he would say. "Lieutenant Commander," he called, careful with the syllables. "If you're with us, I need your count." Erin rose out of the dark by degrees, elbows, shoulders, face. Dusk took a thin blade of light and laid it across her cheekbone, then along the bandage at her temple. Dry blood streaked toward her jaw like weathered paint. "4 on the ridge," she said. 2 ribs, probable crack. 1 hip bruised. All ambulatory. Silence arrived like a blanket thrown over a cage. The youngest's mouth opened and forgot how to word. The tallest's arms, which had been crossed, dropped, empty of theater. The wiry one lost a centimeter of height, as if the ground had subtracted him. The medic knelt beside Erin. "Ma'am, permission to, 2 minutes," Erin answered. "Then you can have all of it." Roth stepped forward until the world narrowed to him and her. "Roll your sleeve. No ceremony. No titles. Just the ask a soldier makes when he suspects the answer is a story." Erin tugged the cuff over dust-stiff fabric. The light caught ink when it surfaced, a fraudman trident, fine-lined, close to muscle. Beneath it, a date so small you could miss it unless it belonged to you. Roth stopped dead. He did not touch her arm. He did not need to. His eyes carried recognition like a flare held low. Behind him, a young private breathed almost to himself, "Oh." The whisper traveled the line, soft and sure. "Wait, that's her?" "Calder, you mean?" "Ironclad Calder?" The youngest turned twice tattoo, face tattoo, as if one of them might deny the other. Color drained from his cheeks until he looked lit from underneath. The tallest swallowed audibly, pride collapsing into arithmetic. The wiry one's gaze flicked toward the sea, not to flee but to postpone the bill. Roth's attention never left Erin. "You led Ghost Point," he said. It was not a question. She held his eyes. The nod she gave could have been seen or imagined. Calm held like a taut lime. The medic opened her kit. Her hands hovered, careful and ready. "This will sting," she said softly. "It already does," Erin said, and the medic's mouth eased. Roth turned his head finally to the ridge and then back to the men. He spoke to the air, to the rock, to anyone honest enough to listen. Wardak Province. No moon. Door where there wasn't one. She blew the hinges forward, made a hallway, and pulled 6 of mine from a place that wanted to keep them. When ammo went dry, she held a corner with a knife. We lifted her out last. He did not embellish. He inventoried. Hinges, hallway, 6 men, knife, last. Gooseflesh ran the ridge. It wasn't spectacle. It was recognition, the kind that moves like a tide through people who know what it costs to come home. The youngest tried to speak. "Sir, she rocks." "Stop," Roth said. He didn't raise his voice. The word found its frame and held there. He looked again at Aaron's forearm, at ink and date, at tape around the ring finger grimed to limestone gray. Then he raised his chin toward the contractors. "Which one of you is brave enough to tell the truth first?" No one volunteered. Wind came and went. The vehicles settled on their suspensions with old wood sounds. Below, the sea drew a darker line around a darker shore. The tallest attempted dignity and tripped over it. "Sir, she slipped." Roth didn't look at him. He lifted a brow at the cliff. "You kicked gravel and called it weather. You muscled an arrow and called it a trail. You pushed a woman who outranks you where it counts and called it a slip." The wiry one tried carefully. "With respect, don't spend that word," Roth said. "You've been on a different budget all day." Another whisper from the soldiers, threaded with awe and utility. "Ironclad." The medic taped new gauze over Aaron's cut with touchlight precision. Adhesive tugged hair, stole a wince. Aaron let it happen, and let it pass. Roth's face softened by a degree, warmth without indulgence. "You should have been home," he said quietly. "Everyone is someone's home," Aaron replied. A private's breath hitched. The dusk seemed to lean closer. Roth nodded once, as if accepting a truth that would not change its shape for him. "Can you hold?" he asked, using the economy climbers and soldiers' share. "I hold," Aaron said. The steadiness in her voice made the breeze feel like an amateur. Roth's hand hovered near her wrist, not quite touching, then withdrew. A salute would have been smaller. He faced the men again. "You will be escorted down. No phones, no rehearsals. You will answer questions as if the mountain intends to cross-examine you." He glanced toward the cliff one last time. "Because it will!" The youngest nodded too fast. The tallest stared straight ahead, learning how to stand. The wiry one's shoulders sagged, his calculations rewritten. Roth looked back to Aaron, then to the medic. "Wrap those ribs." "We'll move slow." "Yes, sir," the medic said, already measuring bandage around breath and pain. One of Roth's sergeants stepped up beside him, eyes on Aaron, voice low. "Sir, Ghost Point saved my cousin. He didn't offer a name. He didn't need to." Roth didn't smile. He exhaled something that wanted to be gratitude and settled for respect. "Then pay attention," he said. "This is what that looks like when the cameras aren't here." Dusk found the exact angle that flattered no one and told the truth about everyone. It laid along Aaron's cheek again, across the iron line of her jaw. It lit the blood on her skin without turning it theatrical. It found calm and made it visible. The ridge breathed as one organism, soldiers, stone, sea. Mockery evaporated where silence settled. Even the wind seemed to remember its manners. Somebody in the line couldn't help himself. It came out of him like an answer to a roll call. "Wait, that's her." Another followed, softer, suddenly reverent to nouns. Calder. "Ironclad." Aaron rolled her sleeve down. Not to hide the ink, she had never needed it to speak for her, but to close the file. She watched the men who had laughed at gravity and found out it kept receipts. No gloating moved through her face. No lecture gathered on her tongue. Only the steady, ordinary presence of someone who had done the work while other people were telling stories about it. Roth tipped his cover back a fraction and looked at the horizon as if it had personally offended him by being beautiful on a day like this. "All right," he said to the ridge, to the vehicles, to the evening. "We go down clean." He didn't look at the contractors when he said clean. He didn't have to. The word knew where to land. The medic finished the wrap and helped Erin to her feet. Erin stood like a person who had negotiated with the mountain and won by inches. Blood streaks, bandage, dirt, dignity. Calm, unbroken. "Thank you," she told the medic. "Ma'am," the medic answered, with a smallness that wasn't small at all. Roth gave Erin a nod that stood in for every formal gesture the moment didn't need. Then he turned, voice resuming its unremarkable authority. "Form up." Boots shifted. Radios clicked. The ridge adjusted to movement, model of a system returning to order after being told what order actually is. The youngest glanced back once, pale and newly fluent in silence. The tallest breathed like a man counting more than steps. The wiry one kept his eyes forward, not out of courage, but because the truth behind him was louder. As they stepped off, a private near the end of the file murmured a summary the mountain could have signed. "She climbed without a rope," he said, mostly to himself, "and they thought their story would hold." The dusk took the words and put them where they belonged. On the ridge, the laughter was gone. In its place, the soft, undeniable quiet that follows recognition. The kind that raises goosebumps without asking permission, that makes even guilty men go pale. And in the last clean light, Erin's face, blood-streaked, calm, unbroken, held steady while the world around her remembered her name. The ridge was silent. Wind rolled the mist in slow ribbons, the sea far below breathing iron. The contractors shifted uneasily, waiting for the colonel to deliver judgment. Their jokes had drained out with the light. What lingered now was shame. Colonel James Roth studied Erin Calder for a long moment. His jaw tightened, then he straightened. Without flourish, without word, he lifted his hand in a salute. It was crisp, exact, and heavy with memory. A man who owed her more than he could ever repay put every ounce of that debt into a single gesture. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, one by one, every soldier on the ridge followed. A medic still crouched at Erin's side froze, then rose, hand snapping to brow. The privates in the convoy's shadow stood taller, boots locked, eyes fixed on the woman who had just climbed back from the grave. Even the NATO officers, men and women with careers built on politics and policy, hesitated only a breath before joining. The sound was silence, but it was thick, alive. Mockery had become awe. Whispers had burned away, replaced by the discipline of respect. The three contractors did not move. They stood rooted, pale under dusk light, shame written in their faces like ink they couldn't wash off. Erin said nothing. Words were for those who needed to defend themselves. She needed none. She rose slowly, ribs bound in pain, blood dried across her cheek. Her eyes met Roth's, steady and unflinching. She returned the salute, sharp, simple, the kind that says, "I acknowledge, but I don't belong to ceremony. I belong to duty." The ridge held its breath. For a moment, there was no mountain, no dusk, no history, only respect standing where laughter had been. And you? If you had been there, would you have joined the salute? Or would you have laughed earlier with the men who thought gravity and silence would do their work for them? What choice would you have made when the truth stood bloodied but unbroken, staring back at you with steady eyes? The medic's hands worked with quiet efficiency, tape wrapping around Erin's ribs as the wind combed along the ridge. Every pull of the bandage made her flinch, not with fear, but with the reminder of what her body had endured. Bruised hip, cracked ribs, cuts layered with dust and salt. Injuries had their voices, but she had learned long ago not to let them speak louder than her will. "You'll hate me tomorrow," the medic muttered as she fastened the last strip of tape. "I already do," Erin said softly, managing a faint smile that carried no bitterness. Colonel Roth crouched near, studying her with the respect of a man who knew the price of silence. "We'll evac you out tonight." "You've done enough." She shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," the medic said under her breath, but Erin's eyes never left Roth. "Sir," she said simply, "just doing my duty." It was the kind of statement that sounded small in words but carried the weight of a mountain. She neither asked for credit nor offered complaint. The ridge had seen enough. So had the men who had laughed. The contractors stood off to the side, pale and silent. Their boots shifted on gravel, eyes darting anywhere but toward her. Shame had settled on them like frost, creeping and inescapable. Erin never pointed a finger, never accused them. She didn't need to. Silence had teeth, and it bit deeper than any charge sheet could. The soldiers saw it. The NATO officers saw it. The men who had mocked her were left to choke on their own actions, knowing that every salute, every whispered, ironclad, had rewritten the story they thought they controlled. Later, when she sat in the back of the convoy, ribs strapped tight, Roth asked her quietly, "Why didn't you call them out?" Her gaze drifted to the dark sea. "Because truth doesn't need me to speak for it." "It already stood up tonight." He studied her profile in the low light, the set of her jaw, the calm that followed storms. Then he nodded once, satisfied. The convoy descended the switchbacks in silence. Gravel crunched beneath tires, mist swallowed the cliffs, and the men who had mocked her kept their eyes locked forward, unable to erase the image of her crawling out of shadow with blood on her face and steadiness in her eyes. Back at camp, the report was written with brevity. Injuries noted. Timeline confirmed. Erin Calder's name logged without fanfare. She did not add detail. She did not chase recognition. She knew history didn't care for embellishments. It remembered deeds in the bones of those who survived. Her daughter's letter sat untouched in her pack, edges curled slightly from damp. Erin pulled it free under the lantern glow, her pen hovering only a moment before she wrote, "Today I was reminded, some voices are loud, but some are steady. Be steady, Mia. That's how you'll last." She folded it, pressed it flat, and tucked it back among the others. The camp had gone quiet. Even laughter, which usually carried across tents and trucks, seemed absent. Respect doesn't always arrive with trumpets, sometimes it arrives with hush, when people finally understand what they've been standing beside all along. The moral was carved into that ridge and carried down with every soldier who witnessed it. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout to be noticed. It reveals itself in the hour when silence is heavy, when pain should have broken you, when betrayal should have ended you, and yet you stand. Courage is quiet. Sacrifice is silent. Respect is never given. It is earned, and once earned, it changes the air around you. And Erin Calder? She left the mountain not as a woman who had been pushed, but as a woman who had climbed, not with speeches or accusations, but with the proof of steady hands and a steady heart. The men who mocked her would carry that lesson longer than any punishment. The soldiers who saluted would carry it longer still. And you, if you had been there, what would you have done? Would you have laughed with the crowd, or stood in the silence when respect rose? Some heroes don't climb for glory. They don't reach for applause, or medals, or the spotlight. They climb because someone tried to push them down, because the world dared them to fall, and still they rise. Erin Calder's story reminds us that true courage is never loud. It doesn't boast. It doesn't demand. It simply shows up in the silence, in the struggle, in the moments when most would give up. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories. These tales keep the courage alive for generations to come, and every salute, every share, every comment ensures these voices of service and sacrifice are never forgotten.